The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty main street of Socorro, New Mexico, and Eleanor Mitchell pressed her palm against the worn leather seat to steady herself, her face as expressionless as carved marble despite the churning anxiety in her stomach. It was July of 1878, and the summer heat radiated up from the hard-packed earth in shimmering waves that distorted the scattered buildings of this frontier town she would now call home. Through the small window, she could see a handful of people gathered near the general store, their curious faces turning toward the coach with the hungry interest that strangers always inspired in small towns. Eleanor kept her own face perfectly still, her lips pressed into a thin line, her dark eyes fixed straight ahead as though she could see through the wooden frame of the coach and into some distant future where this moment had already passed. The driver called out something she could not quite hear, and then the door swung open with a protesting creak. A hand appeared, withered and brown from the sun, palm up in offering. Eleanor looked at that hand for a long moment before she placed her own gloved fingers against it and allowed herself to be helped down onto the street. The man attached to the hand was tall and lean, with sun-bleached hair that fell across his forehead beneath a dusty hat. His eyes were the color of the summer sky, startlingly blue against his tanned face, and when he looked at her, something shifted in his expression that she could not name and did not want to examine. "Miss Eleanor Mitchell?" he asked, and his voice was rough like wind over sand, but not unkind. "Yes," she said. The single word fell between them like a stone into still water. "I'm Jacob Carson," he said. "I reckon you were expecting me." She had been expecting someone. The letters had been brief and practical, outlining terms and conditions, as though marriage were a business arrangement, which in truth it was. She needed security and a home. He needed a wife to help run his ranch and perhaps provide children someday. It was all very sensible and completely devoid of sentiment, which suited Eleanor just fine. Sentiment had only ever brought her pain. "I was," she said, and did not elaborate. Jacob Carson studied her face for a moment longer, and she could feel his gaze like the weight of the sun itself. Then he turned and gestured to the coach driver, who was already hauling down her two small trunks. Everything she owned in the world fit into those two battered cases. Everything she had left behind could not fit in any container at all. "We will get you settled," Jacob said, reaching for the larger trunk with an easy strength that suggested he was accustomed to hard physical labor. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I have a wagon waiting." Eleanor nodded and followed him down the street, aware of the eyes tracking her progress, the whispers that started up like wind rustling through dry grass. A mail-order bride was always a source of gossip, and she had learned long ago not to care what strangers thought of her. She had learned not to care about much of anything at all. The wagon was hitched in front of the saloon, and Jacob loaded her trunks into the back with efficient movements. He helped her up onto the seat, and she arranged her skirts carefully, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. Jacob climbed up beside her and took up the reins, clicking his tongue to the horses. They moved forward with a jolt, and Socorro began to fall away behind them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The landscape rolled past in shades of brown and gold, punctuated by the dark green of scrub brush and the occasional twisted juniper tree. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the heat. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Eleanor could feel sweat gathering beneath her collar, but she did not move to fan herself or loosen any buttons. She simply sat and endured, as she had learned to endure everything else. "It is a good ranch," Jacob said finally, breaking the silence. "Not the biggest in the territory, but it turns a profit. I run cattle mostly, some horses. I have two hands who help with the work. Good men, both of them. You will meet them soon enough." Eleanor nodded but said nothing. Jacob glanced at her, and she could feel his puzzlement, his uncertainty. He tried again. "The house is sturdy. 3 rooms and a good roof. I built most of it myself. There is a well that does not run dry, even in summer. You will have everything you need." "I am sure it will be adequate," Eleanor said, her voice as flat as the horizon. "Adequate," Jacob repeated, and there was something in his tone that might have been amusement or might have been frustration. Well, I suppose that is something. They lapsed into silence again, and Eleanor was grateful for it. She did not want to make conversation. She did not want to pretend at pleasantries or feign interest in her new life. She simply wanted to arrive, to fulfill her obligations, and to be left alone with her carefully guarded numbness. The ranch appeared gradually, rising out of the landscape like something that had grown there naturally. The house was low and sprawling, built of adobe with a covered porch that wrapped around the front. There was a barn and several outbuildings, corrals where horses stood with their heads hanging low in the heat, and in the distance she could see the dark shapes of cattle scattered across the range. It was all very neat and well maintained, and Eleanor supposed she should feel relieved or pleased, but she felt nothing at all. Jacob brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, coming around to help her descend. His hands were gentle on her waist as he lifted her down, and she stepped back as soon as her feet touched the ground, putting distance between them. Something flickered across his face, but he said nothing, just turned to unload her trunks. Two men emerged from the barn, both of them wiping their hands on their pants as they approached. One was older, gray-haired and bow-legged, with a face that looked like weathered leather. The other was younger, perhaps in his early 20s, with a mop of dark hair and an easy smile. "This is Frank," Jacob said, indicating the older man, "and that is Tommy. They work the ranch with me." "Madam," Frank said, touching the brim of his hat. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Mitchell," Tommy said, his smile widening. "Mrs. Carson," Jacob corrected, and there was something firm in his voice. "We will be married tomorrow." Eleanor felt all three men looking at her, waiting for some response, some sign of emotion. She gave them nothing. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow." Frank and Tommy exchanged a glance, and Eleanor could read the concern in their faces as clearly as words on a page. They thought she was cold. They thought she was strange. They were right on both counts, and she did not care. Jacob carried her trunks inside, and Eleanor followed him into the dim coolness of the house. It was exactly as he had described it, simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and bare walls. There was a main room with a fireplace and a kitchen area, a smaller room that must be for sleeping, and another door that stood half open, revealing what looked like a second bedroom. "That will be yours," Jacob said, nodding toward the smaller room. "For now, until we are married. After that, well," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "I understand the arrangement," Eleanor said crisply. "I will fulfill my obligations as your wife." Jacob set down the trunks and turned to face her fully, his blue eyes searching her face. "Is that all this is to you?" he asked quietly. "An obligation? What else should it be?" Eleanor asked, and her voice didn't waver. He studied her for a long moment, and she bore his scrutiny without flinching. Finally, he shook his head slowly, as though coming to some private conclusion. "I reckon we all have our reasons for the choices we make," he said. "I will not pry into yours if you do not wish to share them. But Eleanor, we are going to be married. We are going to share a life here. It does not have to be a cold arrangement." "I prefer it that way," Eleanor said. "Do you?" Jacob asked, and there was something almost sad in the way he said it. "Or have you just convinced yourself that you do?" Eleanor felt a flicker of anger, the first real emotion she had allowed herself to feel in months. "You do not know me," she said, her voice sharp. "Do not presume to understand what I prefer or why." Jacob held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "You are right. I do not know you. But I would like to, if you would let me." "That was not part of our agreement," Eleanor said. "Maybe it should have been," Jacob said, and then he turned and walked out of the house, leaving her alone in the cool shadows. Eleanor stood very still for a moment, her hands clenched at her sides. Then she turned and went into her small room, closing the door firmly behind her. She sat down on the narrow bed and stared at the wall, refusing to let herself think about the way Jacob Carson had looked at her. refusing to acknowledge the tiny crack that had appeared in the wall she had built around herself. That night, she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of wood settling, the whisper of wind across the desert. In the morning, she would become a married woman. She would take vows that meant nothing to her, bind herself to a man she did not know, and begin a life that felt like a prison of her own making. But it was still better than what she had left behind. Anything was better than that. The sun rose hot and bright, and Eleanor dressed carefully in her best dress, a dark blue cotton that was years out of fashion but clean and neatly mended. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up, looking at herself in the small mirror Jacob had provided. Her face looked back at her, pale and expressionless, dark eyes empty of everything except exhaustion. She looked like a ghost, she thought, like something that was not quite alive. The ceremony was held in the front room of the house, conducted by a traveling preacher who asked no questions and seemed interested only in collecting his fee. Frank and Tommy stood as witnesses, both of them dressed in their Sunday best and looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. Jacob wore a clean shirt and had shaved, and when he took Eleanor's hand to slip the simple gold band onto her finger, his touch was warm and steady. "Do you, Eleanor Mitchell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the preacher asked. "I do," Eleanor said, her voice clear and emotionless. "Do you, Jacob Carson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jacob said, and he was looking at Eleanor when he said it, his blue eyes steady on her face. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jacob leaned in slowly, giving Eleanor time to pull away if she wished. She did not move, and his lips brushed against hers in the briefest of touches, there and gone so quickly it barely registered. When he pulled back, she saw something in his eyes that looked like disappointment, but it was gone before she could be certain. They shared a simple meal that Frank had prepared, roasted chicken and potatoes and bread, and Eleanor ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Tommy tried to make conversation, talking about the cattle and the upcoming drive to market, but his words seemed to bounce off Eleanor without leaving any impression. Eventually, he gave up and fell silent, and the meal ended in awkward quiet. When night came, Eleanor retired to the larger bedroom, which was now hers as much as Jacob's. She undressed behind a screen, putting on her nightgown with shaking hands, and climbed into the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Jacob came in a few minutes later, moving quietly in the darkness. She heard him undressing, heard the rustle of fabric and the creak of the floorboards. Then the bed dipped as he climbed in beside her, and Eleanor held her breath. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I will not force myself on you. I want you to know that." She said nothing, and after a moment he continued, "I know this is not a love match. I know you came here for practical reasons, and so did I, but I meant what I said yesterday. It does not have to be cold between us. We could try to build something here, something good." "I am your wife," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "I will not refuse my duties." "Duties," Jacob repeated, and she heard him sigh. "Eleanor, I do not want a wife who submits to me out of duty. I want a partner, a companion, someone who shares this life with me because she wants to, not because she feels obligated." "Then you should have married someone else," Eleanor said. There was a long silence. Then Jacob said very quietly, "Maybe you are right." He turned over, putting his back to her, and after a while, his breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Eleanor lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness, feeling the warmth of his body beside her, and understanding, with a distant sort of clarity, that she had hurt him. She told herself she did not care. She told herself it did not matter. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, her dreams were troubled and dark. The days began to take on a rhythm. Eleanor rose early before the sun and prepared breakfast for the men. She cleaned the house and washed the clothes and tended the small vegetable garden behind the house. She cooked and mended and performed all the tasks expected of a ranch wife, and she did them all with the same blank efficiency, never complaining, never smiling, never showing any emotion at all. Jacob watched her. She could feel his eyes on her throughout the day, studying her as though she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. He tried in small ways to reach her. He brought her wildflowers once, a handful of desert blooms that he set on the kitchen table without comment. Eleanor put them in a jar with water, but she did not thank him or acknowledge the gesture in any way. He told her stories sometimes, in the evening, about the ranch or his past or things he had seen in his travels. She listened in silence, never responding, never asking questions. One evening, about a week after their marriage, Jacob was fixing a broken chair leg, his hands moving with practiced skill. You know, he said conversationally, I have seen you perform every task a woman could be asked to do, and you do them all perfectly. But I have never seen you smile. Not even once. Eleanor did not look up from the sewing in her lap. There is nothing to smile about. Nothing at all? Jacob asked, and there was something almost playful in his tone, as though he were testing her. The sunrise this morning was beautiful. The horses had a new foal yesterday. Tommy told a joke at lunch that even Frank laughed at. None of that is worth a smile? No, Eleanor said flatly. Jacob set down his tools and leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. You know what? He said. I am going to make it my mission to see you smile. I do not care how long it takes. Before this year is out, I am going to find something that breaks through that wall you have built around yourself. You will be disappointed, Eleanor said. Maybe, Jacob agreed. But I am a stubborn man, Eleanor Carson, and I do not give up easily. She did not respond, just kept her eyes on her sewing, pushing the needle through the fabric with steady, mechanical precision. But something inside her had shifted just slightly, like a stone settling at the bottom of a still pool. She was not sure what it was, and she did not want to examine it too closely, but it was there nonetheless. Jacob began his campaign the next day. He brought her coffee in the morning, prepared exactly the way she liked it, and set it at her place at the table with a small flourish. Your coffee, madam, he said with exaggerated formality, bowing slightly. Eleanor took the cup and drank without comment, but she saw the flicker of determination in his eyes. At lunch, he told an elaborate story about a cow that had somehow gotten stuck in a tree, complete with dramatic gestures and ridiculous sound effects. Frank and Tommy were laughing so hard they could barely breathe, but Eleanor just looked at Jacob with her dark, expressionless eyes and said, That did not actually happen. Spoil sport, Jacob said, but there was no heat in it. In the evening, he taught her how to throw a lasso, standing behind her and guiding her hands, showing her the proper flick of the wrist. She could feel the warmth of his body against her back, smell the scent of sun and leather, and something else that was uniquely him. She learned the technique quickly, her movements efficient and precise, but she did not smile when she finally managed to loop the rope around the fence post on her first real try. That was excellent, Jacob said, genuine admiration in his voice. Natural talent. It is a practical skill, Eleanor said, handing the rope back to him. Jacob shook his head, but she saw the corner of his mouth quirk up. You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he said. You should not have married me, Eleanor said. And she meant it. Too late now, Jacob said. And there was something in his voice that made her look at him sharply. But his expression was unreadable. The weeks passed, and summer deepened into August. The heat was relentless, turning the land into something that shimmered and wavered like a dream. Eleanor worked through it, ignoring the sweat that soaked through her dress, ignoring the way the sun seemed to press down on her like a physical weight. Jacob and the hands drove the cattle to better grazing, and Eleanor was often alone at the house, which suited her fine. But Jacob always came back in the evenings, always sought her out, always tried in a dozen small ways to coax some reaction from her. He brought her a kitten once, a tiny orange tabby that mewed pitifully and climbed up her skirt with needle-sharp claws. Eleanor picked it up and set it down outside, ignoring its cries. "You do not like cats?" Jacob asked, clearly disappointed. "I do not see the point of them," Eleanor said. "The point?" Jacob repeated. "They do not need a point. They just are. They are soft and warm, and they purr when you pet them. That is enough." "Not for me," Eleanor said, and went back to her work. The kitten stayed anyway, fed by Tommy and Frank, and it prowled around the house and barn with the self-important air of something that owned the place. Eleanor ignored it, but sometimes she caught herself watching it play, pouncing on grasshoppers and stalking imaginary prey, and something that might have been longing stirred in her chest before she ruthlessly suppressed it. One evening in late August, a storm rolled in from the west, great towers of dark clouds that turned the sky the color of a bruise. The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the yard, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, striking the parched earth with audible thuds. Jacob and the hands hurried to secure the animals and batten down anything that might blow away, and Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the storm approach with something that might have been hunger in her eyes. The rain came in a rush, a solid wall of water that turned the world into a gray blur. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it rattled the windows, and lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. Eleanor stepped off the porch and into the downpour, tilting her face up to the sky, letting the rain soak through her dress and into her skin. It was cold and shocking and real, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than numbness. "Eleanor!" Jacob was running toward her from the barn, his hat pulled low against the rain. "What are you doing? You will catch your death." She did not answer, just stood there with her arms spread wide, feeling the rain hammer against her body. Jacob reached her and grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back toward the house, but she resisted, her feet planted firmly in the mud. "Let me go," she said, and her voice was fierce in a way it had not been before. "Not until you come inside," Jacob said, equally fierce. "I do not know what this is about, but you cannot stand out here in a lightning storm. It is not safe." "Maybe I do not want to be safe," Eleanor said, and the words surprised her as much as they clearly surprised him. Jacob stared at her, rain streaming down his face, his blue eyes intense. "Well, that is too bad," he said, "because I care whether you live or die, even if you apparently do not." He picked her up then, ignoring her protests, and carried her bodily into the house. He set her down in front of the fireplace, which Frank had already lit against the chill the storm had brought, and began pulling off her wet outer layers with brisk, impersonal efficiency. "You need to get out of these wet things," he said. "Now, before you get sick." Eleanor's teeth were chattering, and she realized suddenly that she was freezing. Jacob wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her into the bedroom, then left and returned with her nightgown and robe. "Change," he said. "I will make some hot coffee." When she emerged a few minutes later, dry and wrapped in layers, Jacob handed her a steaming mug and sat down beside her on the sofa. The storm raged outside, but inside the house was warm and dry, lit by the flickering glow of the fire. "What was that about?" Jacob asked quietly. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the mug, staring into the dark liquid. For a long moment she did not answer. Then slowly, haltingly, the words began to come. "I had a family," she said. "Back in Missouri, a mother and father, 2 younger sisters. We had a farm, nothing fancy, but it was ours. And then the fever came." She paused, swallowing hard. "It took my mother first, then my youngest sister, Sarah. She was only 8. My father went next, and then Anna, who was 10. I nursed them all. I watched them die one by one, and I could not save any of them." Jacob sat very still, listening. "When it was over, I was alone," Eleanor continued, her voice flat and distant. "The farm was taken for debts. I had nothing. No family, no home. no future. And I realized that caring about people, loving them, only leads to pain. So I decided not to care anymore, not to feel anything. It was easier that way. Eleanor, Jacob said softly, I came here because I needed to survive, she said. Not because I wanted a husband or a home or any of that. I just needed to keep existing, day by day, without feeling anything. And then you started trying to make me smile, trying to make me care, and I. She stopped, her throat tight. You what? Jacob prompted gently. I do not want to feel again, Eleanor said, and her voice broke on the last word. Because if I start to care, if I start to love, then I can lose again. And I cannot survive that. I cannot. Jacob set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. Very slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached out and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and strong and steady. I understand, he said. I do. Loss is the hardest thing in this world, and you have endured more than anyone should have to. But Eleanor, you are not living right now. You are just existing, and that is not the same thing. Living means risking pain, yes, but it also means joy and connection and all the things that make life worth enduring. You make it sound so simple, Eleanor said bitterly. It is not simple at all, Jacob agreed. It is the hardest thing there is, but you are strong enough. You survived everything that happened to your family. You survived losing everything. You are stronger than you know. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time since she had arrived. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the patience, the genuine concern. She saw a good man, a decent man, and something inside her chest cracked just a little bit wider. I do not know how, she whispered. You do not have to know how, Jacob said. You just have to try. One day at a time, one moment at a time. And I will be right here with you, every step of the way. A tear slid down Eleanor's cheek, the first she had allowed herself to shed since her family died. Then another and another, until she was crying in earnest, great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Jacob pulled her into his arms and held her while she wept, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. She cried for her mother and father, for little Sarah and Anna, for everything she had lost and everything she had refused to let herself feel. She cried until she was empty and exhausted, and still Jacob held her, patient and steady as stone. When the tears finally subsided, Eleanor pulled back, wiping at her face with shaking hands. I am sorry, she said. Do not be sorry, Jacob said firmly. Never be sorry for feeling. They sat together in front of the fire while the storm passed overhead, and for the first time since she had arrived, Eleanor did not feel quite so alone. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the world washed clean by the rain. Eleanor woke to find Jacob already up, his side of the bed empty but still warm. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling raw and exposed and strangely lighter, as though some great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When she went into the kitchen, Jacob was making breakfast, frying eggs and bacon with competent efficiency. He looked up when she entered and gave her a small, careful smile. Morning, he said. How are you feeling? Strange, Eleanor admitted. But not bad strange. That is something, Jacob said. He slid eggs onto a plate and handed it to her. Eat. You need your strength. They ate in companionable silence, and Eleanor found herself studying Jacob's face, noticing details she had not paid attention to before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strong line of his jaw. He was handsome, she realized with some surprise. She had looked at him dozens of times and never really seen him until now. What? Jacob asked, noticing her scrutiny. Nothing, Eleanor said quickly, looking down at her plate. But Jacob was grinning now. You were looking at me. I was not, Eleanor lied. You definitely were, Jacob said, and he seemed inordinately pleased by this. This is progress. Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks, and she ducked her head to hide it. But the corner of her mouth, just the very corner, quirked up in something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Jacob saw it. His eyes widened, and he pointed at her with his fork. Was that a smile? Did I just see the beginning of a smile? No, Eleanor said, but she could not quite keep the expression off her face. It was, Jacob crowed, looking delighted. After all this time, I am finally getting somewhere. Do not get cocky, Eleanor said, but there was no heat in it. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Eleanor still did not smile easily or often, but the wall she had built around herself was developing cracks. She began to actually listen when Jacob told his stories in the evening, and sometimes she even asked questions. She petted the orange kitten when it wound around her ankles, and once Jacob caught her holding it in her lap, stroking its soft fur while it purred. When she realized he was watching, she quickly set the cat down and went back to her sewing, but not before he had seen the softness in her expression. Jacob continued his campaign with renewed determination. He taught her to ride, putting her on his gentlest mare and leading her around the corral until she got the feel of it. Eleanor proved to be a natural rider, just as she had been a natural with the lasso, and soon she was cantering around the ring with her dark hair flying behind her. You look like you are flying, Jacob called out, and Eleanor felt something unfurl in her chest, something bright and painful and wonderful. He took her into Socorro one Saturday for supplies, and they walked down the main street together, Eleanor's hand tucked into the crook of his arm. People greeted them as they passed, and Eleanor found herself nodding back, acknowledging them. In the general store, Jacob bought her a length of pretty blue fabric, the color of a clear summer sky. For a new dress, he said, you deserve something nice. You do not have to buy me things, Eleanor protested. I know I do not have to, Jacob said. I want to. There is a difference. On the ride home, Eleanor was quiet, her fingers running over the soft fabric in her lap. Thank you, she said finally, and the words were soft but sincere. You are welcome, Jacob said, and the smile he gave her was like the sun breaking through clouds. September came, bringing cooler temperatures and the beginning of the autumn work. There were cattle to be moved, fences to be mended, supplies to be laid in for the coming winter. Eleanor worked alongside the men, proving herself capable and hardworking. Frank, who had been skeptical of her at first, began to treat her with genuine respect. Tommy clearly adored her, though he was careful not to overstep any boundaries. One afternoon, Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard shouting from outside. She ran to the window and saw Tommy's horse rearing up, spooked by a rattlesnake that had slithered into the corral. Tommy was thrown, landing hard in the dirt, and the horse's hooves came down perilously close to his head. Without thinking, Eleanor grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and ran outside. She vaulted the corral fence with a grace that would have surprised her if she had stopped to think about it, and brought the poker down on the snake, killing it with two quick strikes. Then she grabbed the horse's reins and spoke to it in a low, soothing voice, calming it until it stopped rearing. Jacob and Frank came running from the barn, and Jacob took the horse from her while Frank helped Tommy to his feet. The young man was shaken but unhurt, and he looked at Eleanor with something like awe. You saved my life, he said. The snake might not have bitten you, Eleanor said, but her hands were shaking now that the crisis was past. The horse might have trampled me, Tommy insisted. You were so fast, so brave. Jacob appeared at her side and took the poker from her hands, setting it aside. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes searching her face. I am fine, Eleanor said, though in truth she felt a bit lightheaded. Jacob put his arm around her shoulders and guided her back to the house. Once inside, he made her sit down and brought her water, hovering over her with a concern that was both touching and slightly annoying. I am not made of glass, Eleanor said. I am not going to shatter. I know that, Jacob said. But you just killed a rattlesnake with a fireplace poker. I think I am allowed to fuss a little. Eleanor looked up at him, and something in her chest squeezed tight. He cared about her. Really, genuinely cared. And the terrifying thing was, she was starting to care about him too. Jacob, she said, and then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. He crouched down in front of her, taking her hands in his. What is it? She started, then tried again. You have been very patient with me, very kind. I have not made it easy. You have been through hell, Jacob said simply. You deserve patience and kindness. You are a good man, Eleanor said, and the words felt important, significant in a way she could not quite articulate. I'm trying to be, Jacob said, especially for you. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and irreversible. She was falling for her husband, she realized. Despite all her resolutions, despite all her fears, she was falling in love with Jacob Carson. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Eleanor reached for Jacob in the darkness. Her hand found his shoulder, tentative and uncertain, and he went very still. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough. She swallowed hard. I would like. That is, if you still want. Jacob rolled over to face her, and even in the darkness she could feel the intensity of his gaze. I need you to be sure, he said. I need to know you are doing this because you want to, not because you think you should. I want to, Eleanor said, and it was true. She wanted to feel connected to him, wanted to be close to him in a way she had not allowed herself to want anything in a very long time. Jacob kissed her then, soft and gentle, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Eleanor did not pull away. She kissed him back, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, and when his hands moved over her body, she let herself feel the pleasure of it, the wonder of being touched with such tenderness. They came together slowly, carefully, and afterward Jacob held her close, his fingers trailing through her hair. Eleanor lay against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt something she had not felt since her family died. She felt safe. Jacob, she whispered into the darkness. Yes? I am glad I came here. I am glad I married you. She felt him smile against her hair. I am glad too, he said. So very glad. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn color on the distant mountains. Eleanor made her new dress from the blue fabric Jacob had bought her, stitching carefully in the evenings, while Jacob read aloud from the newspaper or a book. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, existing in each other's presence, and Eleanor found that she treasured these quiet moments as much as the more dramatic ones. She was baking bread one afternoon when she heard horses approaching the house. Looking out the window, she saw 3 men she did not recognize riding into the yard. Something about them made her uneasy, though she could not have said exactly what. They had hard faces, and their hands rested too casually near their guns. Jacob came out of the barn, Frank and Tommy behind him, and the strangers reined in their horses. Eleanor could not hear what was being said, but she could see the tension in Jacob's shoulders, the way he shifted his weight onto the balls of his feet as though preparing for trouble. One of the strangers pointed toward the house, and Eleanor's blood ran cold. She knew instinctively that they were talking about her. Moving quickly, she went to the chest where Jacob kept his rifle and took it out, checking to make sure it was loaded. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was young, and her hands remembered the weight and balance of the weapon. Outside, voices were being raised. Eleanor could hear the stranger saying something about a woman, about checking papers, and Jacob's reply, sharp and angry. Then one of the men made to dismount, clearly intending to come to the house, and Jacob stepped in front of him. You are not welcome here, Jacob said, loud enough that Eleanor could hear him clearly through the window. You need to leave. Now. We have business with the woman, the stranger said. She is my wife, and you have no business with her at all. Jacob said, and there was steel in his voice. Eleanor did not wait to hear more. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely but competently across her chest. All eyes turned to her. "I am Eleanor Carson," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Who are you, and what do you want?" The lead stranger, a man with a drooping mustache and cold eyes, looked her up and down. "We are looking for a woman named Eleanor Mitchell. Run away from her employment in Kansas City. There is a reward for her return." Eleanor felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face impassive. She had left Kansas City after her family died, had worked as a seamstress for a wealthy family who had treated her little better than a slave. When she could no longer endure it, she had left in the night, owing them money for her passage and board. She had not thought they would pursue her this far. "I do not know who you are talking about," Eleanor said steadily. "My name is Eleanor Carson, and I am a married woman. You have made a mistake." "Have we?" the man said, but he was looking at the rifle in her hands and at Jacob and Frank and Tommy, who had all moved to stand between him and the house. "You have," Jacob said flatly. "And now you are going to leave my property before I have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." The stranger studied them all for a long moment, and Eleanor could see him calculating odds, weighing possibilities. Finally, he shrugged. "Maybe we were mistaken," he said, "but we will be keeping an eye out, just in case." He turned his horse and rode out, his companions following. They did not look back, but Eleanor did not lower the rifle until they had disappeared from view. Jacob came quickly up onto the porch and took the rifle from her hands, setting it aside. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. Eleanor nodded, though she was shaking. "They were looking for me," she said quietly. "The family I worked for in Kansas City. I left owing them money." "How much?" Jacob asked. $60, Eleanor said. "It might as well be 1,000. I could never repay it." Jacob's jaw tightened. "They worked you as an indentured servant." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "That is illegal," Jacob said. "They cannot force you to return." "They can try," Eleanor said. "And they will if they think they can collect the reward." Jacob took her hands in his, gripping them tightly. "Listen to me," he said. "You are my wife. You are under my protection. No one is taking you anywhere. Do you understand?" Eleanor looked into his fierce blue eyes and felt tears prickling at her own. "Jacob, I do not want to bring trouble to your door." "You are not bringing trouble," Jacob said firmly. "Those men are the trouble, and we will deal with them if we have to. But you are staying right here where you belong." Where she belonged. The words echoed in Eleanor's mind, and suddenly, without warning, she smiled. It was a real smile, small but genuine, the first true smile she had allowed herself in more than a year. Jacob's eyes widened. "You are smiling," he said wonderingly. "I suppose I am," Eleanor said, and the smile widened just a fraction. "Why now?" Jacob asked, though he was grinning like a fool himself. "Because you said I belong here," Eleanor said simply. "And I think maybe I do." Jacob pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly, right there on the porch in full view of Frank and Tommy, who whooped and hollered from the yard. Eleanor kissed him back, not caring who saw, feeling something bright and fierce blazing in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and laughing, and Eleanor realized that she had not laughed, really laughed, since before her family died. It felt strange and wonderful and a little bit terrifying, but she did not try to stop it. "There is that smile," Jacob said softly, touching her cheek. "I have been waiting months to see it." "It was worth the wait?" Eleanor asked. "More than worth it," Jacob said. "You are beautiful when you smile, Eleanor Carson. Absolutely beautiful." That night they made plans. Jacob rode into Socorro the next day and spoke with the sheriff, explaining the situation. The sheriff, a gruff man named Tom Holden, assured Jacob that as a married woman with legal papers to prove it, Eleanor could not be compelled to return to her former employers. If the bounty hunters came back, they would be arrested. Though you might want to pay off that debt anyway, Sheriff Holden suggested, just to be done with it. Jacob agreed, and he wired the money to Kansas City the following week, along with a tersely worded letter explaining that Mrs. Eleanor Carson was a married woman living in New Mexico and would not be returning under any circumstances. A reply came back a few days later, acknowledging receipt of the payment and releasing Eleanor from any further obligation. When Jacob showed her the letter, Eleanor read it 3 times, barely able to believe it was real. She was free, truly completely free of her past. "I will pay you back," she said, looking up at Jacob. "Every penny. I promise." "You will do no such thing," Jacob said. "What is mine is yours, Eleanor. That includes my money. We are partners in this marriage, remember?" Eleanor threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and relief and growing love into the gesture. Jacob kissed her back with equal fervor, and they stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms. November settled over the ranch, bringing cold winds and the first light dustings of snow on the distant peaks. Eleanor found herself settling into her role as ranch wife with something that felt almost like contentment. She had learned to ride well enough to help move cattle, and she could handle a gun and a lasso with equal competence. She had made friends with the ranchers' wives in the surrounding area, and they had welcomed her into their circle with genuine warmth. But more than any of that, she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with her husband. It had happened gradually, so slowly that she had not noticed until it was already complete. She loved the way he laughed, loud and unrestrained. She loved the way he treated his horses and cattle with gentle respect. She loved his patience with Tommy, who was still learning, and his easy friendship with Frank. She loved the way he looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. One evening in late November, they were sitting together by the fire, Eleanor mending a shirt and Jacob oiling his saddle. The orange kitten, now a half-grown cat they had named Rusty, was curled up on Eleanor's lap, purring contentedly. "Jacob," Eleanor said, and he looked up at her. "I need to tell you something." He set down the saddle, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" Eleanor took a breath, gathering her courage. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I did not think I would ever love anyone again, did not want to risk it, but I cannot help it. I love you, Jacob Carson, and I thought you should know." For a moment, Jacob just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, transforming him. "Say it again," he said. "I love you," Eleanor repeated, smiling herself now. Jacob crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her up into his arms, scattering sewing and cat in all directions. Rusty yowled his protest and stalked off with offended dignity, but Eleanor barely noticed. Jacob was kissing her, deep and passionate and full of joy. "I love you too," he said against her mouth. "God, Eleanor, I have loved you for months. Since you killed that rattlesnake, maybe earlier. You are fierce and brave and beautiful, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free, and kissed him again. They made love right there on the rug in front of the fire, urgent and passionate, and afterward they lay tangled together, watching the flames dance. "I never thought I would be this happy," Eleanor said softly. "I thought happiness was something that had been taken from me forever." "You deserve to be happy," Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." December brought snow in earnest, blanketing the ranch in white and transforming the landscape into something magical and strange. Eleanor had never seen so much snow, and she stood on the porch watching it fall with something like wonder on her face. Jacob came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Beautiful, is it not?" "It is," Eleanor agreed. "Everything is so quiet, So peaceful. Do you miss Missouri? Jacob asked. Eleanor thought about it, really thought about it. I miss my family, she said finally. I will always miss them. But Missouri itself, no, I do not miss it. This is my home now. Good, Jacob said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Because I plan to keep you here for a very long time, forever if I have my way. Forever sounds good to me, Eleanor said, and turned in his arms to kiss him. They celebrated Christmas quietly, just the two of them and Frank and Tommy. Eleanor cooked a feast, roasting a goose and making pies and fresh bread. She had knitted scarves for all the men, working on them in secret for weeks. Jacob gave her a beautiful leather journal with her name embossed on the cover. For your thoughts, he said, or recipes, or anything you want to write down. I thought you might like it. Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched beyond words. It is perfect, she said. Thank you. That night, after Frank and Tommy had retired to the bunkhouse, Jacob and Eleanor sat together by the fire, content and full and happy. Eleanor was writing in her new journal, documenting the day, and Jacob was reading. It was peaceful and domestic and exactly the sort of evening Eleanor had never thought she would have. Jacob, she said suddenly, and he looked up. I am pregnant. The book fell from Jacob's hands, landing on the floor with a thud. He stared at her, his eyes wide. You are? Eleanor nodded, smiling. I think so. I am almost certain. Jacob let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. Eleanor laughed, clutching at his shoulders. Careful, you will make me dizzy. A baby, Jacob said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. We are going to have a baby. Yes, Eleanor said, and she could not stop smiling. In late summer, I think. Jacob dropped to his knees in front of her and pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her hips. I love you, he said, his voice muffled. Both of you. Eleanor stroked his hair, feeling tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. She had thought her life was over when her family died. She had thought she would never care about anything or anyone again. But here she was, in a small ranch in New Mexico, married to a good man who loved her and carrying his child. Life, she thought, was full of surprises. The winter passed slowly, and Eleanor's pregnancy progressed without complication. Jacob fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from doing any heavy work, but Eleanor refused to be coddled. She was pregnant, not fragile, and she continued to perform her duties as ranch wife even as her belly swelled. Spring came with a rush of green across the desert, wildflowers blooming in profusion. Eleanor walked through the meadows near the house, her hands resting on her belly, talking to the baby growing inside her. She told it about its father, about the ranch, about all the things they would do together. She found herself making plans for the future, something she had not done since her family died, and the realization filled her with quiet joy. One April evening, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Eleanor and Jacob sat together on the porch. Eleanor was knitting tiny booties, and Jacob was whittling a small wooden horse for the baby. Do you think it will be a boy or a girl? Jacob asked. I do not know, Eleanor said. Either would be wonderful. I hope it has your eyes, Jacob said. Dark and deep, beautiful. Eleanor smiled at him, and it came so easily now, that smile. She smiled often these days, and sometimes she even laughed, the sound bright and surprised and joyful. I hope it has your kindness, she said. Your patience, all the things that make you a good man. Jacob reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They sat that way until the stars came out, watching the night settle over the desert, perfectly content. In August, when the heat lay heavy over the land, Eleanor went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jacob, pacing frantically in the next room, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But Eleanor was strong, stronger than anyone had given her credit for. And when the sun rose on a new day, a baby's cry filled the house. Jacob burst into the room to find Eleanor propped up against the pillows, exhausted and sweating and smiling wider than he had ever seen her smile. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. "A boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy baby boy." Jacob approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were dark like Eleanor's. Jacob felt his heart swell so large he thought it might burst. "He is perfect," Jacob said hoarsely. "You are perfect. Both of you." Eleanor looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. But they were happy tears. "We made a person," she said wonderingly. "We made this perfect little person." Jacob kissed her forehead, then her lips, then the baby's downy head. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but had never quite settled on one. Now Eleanor looked down at her son and said, "Henry, after my father." "Henry Carson," Jacob said, testing it out. "I like it. Henry Jacob Carson." "Perfect," Eleanor said, and held their son out to Jacob. He took the baby carefully, cradling him against his chest, and felt tears prickling at his own eyes. This was his family, his wife and his son, his whole world contained in this one small room. The next months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and dirty diapers and moments of pure, transcendent joy. Henry was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he had his mother's solemn temperament. But when he smiled, which he did often, it was with Jacob's open, sunny disposition. Eleanor found that motherhood came naturally to her, though she had not expected it to. She sang to Henry as she rocked him, old songs her own mother had sung to her, and the memories did not hurt quite so much anymore. She could think about her family now without feeling like she was drowning in grief. They would always be a part of her, but they were her past. Jacob and Henry were her future. On a cool October evening, when Henry was 2 months old, the little family sat together on the porch. Henry was asleep in Eleanor's arms, and Jacob had his arm around her shoulders. The sun was setting in shades of pink and gold, and the world felt peaceful and right. "I have been thinking," Jacob said, "about expanding the herd next spring, maybe adding some sheep as well." "That sounds good," Eleanor said. "We could use the extra income, especially with Henry growing so fast." "He is going to need a brother or sister eventually," Jacob said, grinning at her. "We do not want him to be an only child." Eleanor laughed softly, so as not to wake the baby. "One thing at a time, Mr. Carson. Let me get this one sleeping through the night before we start planning the next." "Fair enough," Jacob said, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Eleanor." "I love you too," Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole heart. A year passed, then another. Henry grew from a baby into a toddler, walking and talking and getting into everything. Eleanor found herself pregnant again, and this time it was a girl they named Clara after Jacob's mother. She had golden hair like her father and a smile that could light up a room. The ranch prospered under Jacob's management and Eleanor's careful stewardship. They added more land, more cattle, and built a proper bunkhouse for the hands. Frank retired eventually, too old for the hard physical labor, but they kept him on to help with lighter tasks and to tell stories to the children. Tommy married a girl from town and built a house on the far edge of the property, and his wife and Eleanor became fast friends. Through it all, Eleanor smiled. She smiled easily and often, and sometimes Jacob would catch her laughing at something one of the children had done or humming as she worked, and he would have to stop and just look at her, amazed at the transformation. This was not the cold, closed-off woman who had stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago. This was someone who had learned to live again, to love again, to open her heart to all the messy, complicated, wonderful possibilities of life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jacob and Eleanor left the children with Tommy and his wife and rode out to a place Jacob knew, a hidden canyon where a spring bubbled up from the rocks and wildflowers grew in riotous profusion. They spread a blanket and shared a simple picnic, bread and cheese and wine, and talked about everything and nothing. Do you ever regret it? Eleanor asked. Sending for a mail order bride? You could have married someone local, someone you knew. Jacob looked at her seriously. Not for one single second, he said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Carson. You and our children. I would not change a thing. Not even those first few months when I would not smile or talk to you? Eleanor asked, teasing. Especially not those months, Jacob said, because it made it all the sweeter when you finally did smile, when you finally let me in. I knew I had earned it, that it was real and not just something given lightly. Eleanor leaned over and kissed him, slow and deep. You are a good man, Jacob Carson, she said. The best man I know. And you are the strongest woman I know, Jacob said. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side with your heart still intact. That takes courage. Eleanor thought about that, about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. I do not think I would have made it without you, she said honestly. You gave me a reason to try again, a reason to believe that life could be good. We saved each other, Jacob said simply. That is what love does. They lay back on the blanket and watched the clouds drift overhead, their hands intertwined. Eleanor felt completely, perfectly happy, and the feeling no longer frightened her. She had learned that happiness was not something to be feared or guarded against. It was something to be embraced, celebrated, held close with open hands. Years continued to pass. Henry grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch and spent every moment he could with his father, learning to ride and rope and all the skills he would need to run the place someday. Clara was bright and mischievous, with her mother's intelligence and her father's charm. Two more children followed, another boy named Samuel and a girl they called Rose, and the house was always full of noise and laughter and life. Eleanor became known throughout the county as a woman to be relied upon. She delivered babies when the midwife could not be found in time, nursed the sick during an influenza outbreak, and organized the women of Socorro to build a proper schoolhouse for their children. She was respected and admired, and she had friends, real friends, who valued her for who she was. But most of all, she had Jacob. After all the years, after all the children and the hard work and the daily routine of life, she still loved him with an intensity that sometimes surprised her. He was her partner, her best friend, the person who knew her better than anyone else in the world. He had seen her at her worst, at her most broken and defended, and he had loved her anyway. He had been patient when she needed patience, fierce when she needed protection, and gentle when she needed comfort. He had made it his mission to see her smile, and in doing so, he had given her back her life. On a summer evening in 1893, 15 years after Eleanor had first arrived in Socorro, the family gathered on the porch as they often did. Henry was 18 now, preparing to take on more responsibility at the ranch. Clara was 13, all long legs and opinions. Samuel was 10, quiet and thoughtful, and Rose was 8, with her father's blue eyes and a laugh that could chase away any darkness. Jacob and Eleanor sat in their rocking chairs, his hand holding hers as it always did, watching their children play in the yard. The sun was setting in its familiar blaze of color, and the air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. Do you remember when I said I was going to make you smile? Jacob asked suddenly. Eleanor turned to look at him, her face soft with love. I remember, she said. You were very determined. I had no idea what I was taking on, Jacob said, but he was grinning. A woman who never smiled, who never showed any emotion at all. It should have been impossible. But you did it anyway, Eleanor said. We did it together, Jacob corrected. You did the hard work, Eleanor. You chose to try again, to risk feeling again. I just gave you a reason to. Eleanor squeezed his hand, looking out at their children, at the ranch that had become her home, at the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. I am glad I came here, she said. I am glad I married you, Jacob Carson. You gave me everything I thought I had lost: hope and joy and love, a family, a home, a reason to smile. And you gave me the same, Jacob said, plus 4 beautiful children and the best 15 years of my life. Only 15? Eleanor teased. What about the next 50? Jacob laughed, that loud, unrestrained laugh she loved so much. The next 50 will be even better, he said. I promise you that. Rose came running up onto the porch then, her face flushed and her hair wild. Papa, Mama, come see. Henry taught me to rope, and I caught the fence post on my first try. Did you now? Eleanor said, smiling at her youngest daughter. That is wonderful, sweetheart. Come watch me do it again, Rose demanded, grabbing her father's hand and trying to pull him up from his chair. Jacob allowed himself to be pulled to his feet, and Eleanor rose as well. Together they walked out into the yard where their children waited, all of them talking at once, eager to show off their various accomplishments. Eleanor stood in the middle of her family and felt such a surge of love and gratitude that it nearly overwhelmed her. She had been a mail-order bride who never smiled, who had armored her heart against feeling anything at all. And then she had met a stubborn cowboy who had made it his mission to see her smile, who had refused to give up on her even when she had given up on herself. He had taught her that love was not something to be feared, that happiness was worth the risk of pain, that life was meant to be lived fully and deeply and with an open heart. And she had learned. Oh, how she had learned! As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and the children's laughter rang out across the desert, Eleanor Carson smiled. It was not a small smile or a hesitant one. It was wide and bright and full of joy, the smile of a woman who had found her way home at last. Jacob caught her eye across the yard and smiled back at her, that same sunny grin that had captivated her all those years ago. And in that moment, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the people she was meant to be with. She had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, had arrived broken and defended and determined never to feel again. But love, she had discovered, was stronger than fear. Hope was stronger than grief. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who saw through all your armor to the person underneath. Someone who refused to let you hide, someone who made it their mission to bring you back to life. Jacob Carson had been that person for her. He had been patient when she needed patience, persistent when she needed persistence, and loving when she needed love. He had seen her at her absolute worst and had loved her anyway. He had made her laugh when she thought she would never laugh again. He had made her hope when she thought hope was dead. And most of all, he had made her smile. And that smile, hard-won and genuine and full of life, was perhaps his greatest gift to her of all. The family stayed outside until the stars filled the sky and the air grew cool, until the children were yawning and rubbing their eyes. Then they went inside together, into the house that Jacob had built and Eleanor had made into a home, and settled in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight they were together, safe and warm and loved. And that was all that mattered. Eleanor lay in bed beside her husband that night, listening to him breathe in the darkness. She thought about the young woman she had been, stepping off that stagecoach with a heart full of grief and a determination never to feel anything again. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, both the terrible ones and the beautiful ones, the losses and the gains, the sorrow and the joy. And she realized that she would not change any of it, not even the painful parts, because all of it had been necessary to bring her to this moment, to this life, to this love. Jacob, she whispered into the darkness. He murmured, half asleep. Thank you, she said, for everything, for not giving up on me, for making me smile. Jacob's arms tightened around her, pulling her close. Thank you for letting me, he said. for trusting me with your heart, for building this life with me. I love you, Eleanor. I love you too, Eleanor said, and closed her eyes, smiling even in the darkness. She had come to Socorro as a mail-order bride, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, wanting only to survive. But she had found so much more than survival. She had found love and family and joy. She had found a home and a purpose and a reason to embrace life again. She had found herself, and it had all started with a stubborn cowboy who had made it his mission to see her smile. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, safe in her husband's arms, her last thought was that she was grateful, so deeply grateful that he had succeeded. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the everyday rhythms of ranch life and the deeper currents of love and family. Eleanor and Jacob grew older together. Their children grew up and started families of their own, and the ranch continued to prosper. They faced hardships, as all families do, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Henry eventually took over the running of the ranch, proving himself to be as capable and hardworking as his father. Clara married a doctor and moved to Santa Fe, but visited often, bringing her own children to run wild on the ranch where she had grown up. Samuel became a teacher, dedicating his life to education, and Rose married a rancher from a neighboring property, ensuring that she stayed close to her family. Through it all, Eleanor and Jacob remained at the heart of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They were grandparents now, and the house was often full of the noise and chaos of grandchildren, but they would not have had it any other way. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were dozens of people there, children and grandchildren and friends, all come to honor the marriage that had started so unpromisingly and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Jacob stood up to make a speech, and the crowd fell silent. He was older now, his hair more silver than gold, his face deeply lined by years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still that same startling blue, and when he looked at Eleanor, they shone with undimmed love. 30 years ago, he said, a woman stepped off a stagecoach in Socorro, and my life changed forever. She was the most serious, solemn person I had ever met. She never smiled, never laughed, never showed any emotion at all. And I took one look at her and thought to myself, I am going to make that woman smile if it is the last thing I do. The crowd laughed, and Jacob grinned. It took months, he continued. Months of trying everything I could think of being patient when I wanted to shake her, of waiting for her to trust me enough to let me in. But eventually she did. She let down her walls and let me see the incredible woman underneath. And when she finally smiled at me, really smiled, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He turned to Eleanor, holding out his hand. She rose and came to stand beside him, and he put his arm around her waist. Eleanor Carson, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, my everything. These 30 years with you have been the greatest blessing I could have asked for. You gave me a family, a home, a life full of love and meaning, and you still smile at me every single day, and I still treasure it every single time. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. Jacob Carson, she said, her voice breaking, you saved my life. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. You gave me back myself. I was so lost when I came here, so broken, and you put me back together piece by piece with your patience and your kindness and your stubborn refusal to give up on me. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you. They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their family, and Eleanor felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt all those years ago when she had first realized she was falling in love with her husband. Some things she thought never changed: the depth of love, the joy of being known and cherished, the comfort of a hand to hold. Through all of life's challenges, these things remained constant no matter how many years passed. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories. Eleanor danced with Jacob, and then with each of her children and several of her grandchildren, and she smiled until her cheeks ached. She looked around at all the faces, at the family she and Jacob had created together, and felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost painful. This was her legacy, not just the children and grandchildren, though they were precious beyond measure, but the love that bound them all together, the foundation of trust and respect and genuine affection that she and Jacob had built, and that had spread to encompass everyone in their orbit. As the party finally wound down and the guests began to depart, Eleanor and Jacob found themselves alone on the porch, just as they had been so many times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and sweet. "Another 30 years?" Jacob asked, taking her hand. Eleanor laughed softly. "At least," she said. "I am not ready to be done with you yet, Mr. Carson." "Good," Jacob said, "because I am not ready to be done with you either, Mrs. Carson." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around them. Eleanor thought about the young woman she had been, arriving in Socorro with nothing but two small trunks and a heart full of scars. She thought about all the moments, large and small, that had brought her to this place. The first time Jacob had made her almost smile, the day she had killed the rattlesnake, the storm when she had finally broken down and told him about her family, the moment she had realized she loved him, the birth of each of their children, all the years of daily life, of working and laughing and building something together. It had not been easy. There had been hard times, lean years, moments of doubt and fear. But they had weathered it all together, and that had made even the difficult times bearable. "Do you know what I am most proud of?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "What?" Jacob asked. "That we built this," she said, gesturing to the house, the ranch, the life they had created. "That we took two broken people and made something whole. That we loved each other enough to be patient, to be kind, to keep trying even when it was hard." "We did do that, did we not?" Jacob said, and there was wonder in his voice. "We really did." "Yes," Eleanor said. "We did." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against her hair. They stayed that way for a long time, just being together, needing no words. After 30 years of marriage, they had learned that silence could be as eloquent as speech, that simply being present with each other was often enough. Finally, as the night grew late and the cold began to seep into their bones, they went inside. The house was quiet now, everyone gone or asleep, and it felt peaceful. They got ready for bed with the ease of long practice, moving around each other in the familiar dance of a couple who knew each other inside and out. When they climbed into bed, Jacob pulled Eleanor close, and she settled against him with a contented sigh. This, she thought, was home. Not the house or the ranch or even Socorro itself, but this, the feeling of being held by someone who loved her completely, who knew all her secrets and scars, and loved her anyway. "Good night, my love," Jacob murmured. "Good night," Eleanor said, and then, because it still felt important to say it, "I love you." "I love you too," Jacob said. "Always." Eleanor closed her eyes and smiled, that same genuine, joyful smile that Jacob had worked so hard to see all those years ago. It came easily now, naturally, as much a part of her as breathing. She had been a woman who never smiled, who had locked her heart away and thrown away the key. But love had found her anyway, in the form of a stubborn cowboy who had refused to accept her walls, who had chipped away at them day by day until they finally crumbled. And on the other side of those walls, she had found life. Real, messy, beautiful life, full of joy and sorrow and everything in between. She had found love and family and purpose. She had found herself. The young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in 1878 would barely recognize the woman Eleanor had become. That young woman had been cold and closed and determined never to feel anything again. But this Eleanor, the Eleanor of 1908, was warm and open and fully alive. She loved deeply and laughed often and smiled every single day. It had been Jacob's mission to make her smile, and he had succeeded beyond either of their wildest dreams. But in truth, she had succeeded too. She had done the hard work of healing, of opening her heart again, of choosing to live fully despite the risks. She had been brave enough to love again, and that bravery had been rewarded 1,000 times over. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, she felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the love she had found, for the family she had created, for the home she had made. Gratitude for every smile, every laugh, every moment of joy. And gratitude, most of all, for the stubborn cowboy who had made it his mission to see her smile and who had loved her enough to wait until she was ready to let him in. Eleanor Carson, who had once been a mail-order bride who never smiled, now smiled in her sleep, her face peaceful and content. She had found her happy ending, not in some distant fairy tale, but right here in the everyday reality of a life well lived and a love well earned. And that, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was the best ending of all.